Hi there and welcome back. Today we're back in my hometown of Newbury, West Berkshire, England, and we've come to look at 10 unique historical sites of the town from the 16th century to the 20th century and their backstories. I thought this would be a good way of exploring the history of Newbury in a short video. And even if you live in Newbury, hopefully you'll learn something new, so stick with it. We're going to start off our 10-stop tour bang smack in the centre of town, in the Market Square, which everybody knows. The market itself is a historical place and was given its royal charter in 1596 by Queen Elizabeth I. So let's get our 10-stop tour underway. We're going to stay in Market Place for our first site, and that is the Queen Victoria Memorial. Victoria was the second longest reigning monarch in British history. The longest reigning is the present incumbent Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Victoria was an extremely popular monarch who defined an era in British history. So, when she died in 1901, aged 81, there was a national outpouring of grief, and monuments to her were constructed in many major British towns and cities. In 1903, nouveau-rich circus owner George Sanger commissioned and privately funded a monument to Queen Victoria for Newbury Town. The monument was designed by Arthur E. Pierce and constructed from buff terracotta by Dalton's Potteries Limited. The figure was of Queen Victoria in her later years, set on a terracotta pedestal, guarded by 4 terracotta lions, and attended by an allegorical female figure holding aloft a laurel wreath, intended to signify fame. The whole monument was mounted on a granite plinth and situated in the centre of Market Place in Newbury, surrounded by a low chain fence suspended on cast iron bollards. Right then, that's the history of the monument. Let's look at it in 2022. It's not there anymore. And this is where the story starts to get interesting. In 1933, the monument was demolished. The terracotta sculpted parts were put into storage in the back lot of Greenham House, which is a Newbury Town Council owned property about a mile and a half away, and then left to rot for the next 3 decades. To demolish a monument to a monarch, particularly a popular and well-respected one such as Queen Victoria, is very unusual in Britain. There are likely to be 2 reasons why this happened. Firstly, it was genuinely in the way of motor cars, which now proliferated on the streets in the early 1930s. Also, and more realistically, the monument was never really appreciated by the town council, as it was funded privately by George Sanger and considered a gauche folly by an establishment outsider with too much money. By 1933, with both Queen Victoria and George Sanger both long dead, Newbury Town Council got rid of their problem they never really approved of. After 30 years languishing unwanted and unloved in Greenham House, in 1966 the Queen Victoria Monument was resurrected and placed where you'll find it today at the northern end of Victoria Park in Newbury. It surprises me that it took 3 decades for Newbury Council to make that very obvious connection. Well, here she is today. It is sad that unfortunately the granite plinth was sold on in 1933, as well as the wrought iron bollards and chain fencing. But you have to accept that Victoria Park is a suitable place as any for Queen Victoria's memorial. Originally in 1966, only 2 of the 4 lions accompanied her from Greenham House, and the other 2 lions being reunited in 2002. But the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice there's one key element of the original monument still missing, and that's Lady Fame. So let's track her down. I know where she is. She's about a mile and a half away, or about a 20-minute walk. Let's go. And here she is. Lady Fame now has a role as the centrepiece of Greenham Gardens, which is a small, publicly owned green space next to the A339 dual carriageway roundabout. The years have not been kind to Lady Fame. She is now missing her laurel wreath bearing right arm and has some other damage. There is talk of the council funding a full restoration on this statue, which is good, and I think she does a good job of guarding Greenham Gardens, but for historical accuracy, I really think she should be reunited with Queen Victoria and the Lions in Victoria Park. Our next historical site and story brings us very much into the 20th century, 1985 to be exact, and a story and subject that you will all be involved in, whether you realise it or not. This is the old brewery building courtyard, Broadway, Newbury, built in 1800 and converted into offices in 1971. In 1980, it was the first headquarters of a branch of Racal Electronics, a UK defence contractor, whose chairman, Ernest Harrison, had a vision to civilianise the mobile military trunk radio system for business and private use. He created the subsidiary company Racal Voice and Data Telephony, shortened to Racal Vodafone. By 1982, Racal Vodafone had successfully bid for the use of the radio spectrum needed for cell phone activities and had created a transportable radio telephone unit called the VT1. This was based on the military ptarmigan system. This analogue radio cell phone cost you $1,500 in 1984, or 6,000 GB pounds today. It weighed the same as a car battery and gave about 45 minutes of not very clear voice communication. Concurrently, Racal Vodafone installed about a dozen cell base radio stations around central London to create a network. The network licence allowed the system to go live on the 1st of January 1985. So to ensure their place in history, Michael Harrison, the chairman's son, took a VT1 unit to a New Year's Eve party in London. And at exactly 1 minute past midnight, he made the very first cell phone call from Parliament Square to his father in the Racal Vodafone offices in Newbury Broadway. I will let Michael Harrison tell his own story.
After midnight, we were pretty much on this spot, ready for 1 minute past midnight to make the very first call to my father, Sir Ernest Harrison, the first chairman of Vodafone. And duly at 1 minute past 12, I picked up the phone. This phone here, actually, if you can see it. Picked it up, nice clear line, made the call, and there was my father, the other end of the phone, picking up the receiver to hear me say, "Happy New Year, Dad, it's Mike here. This is the first call ever made on a UK cellular network." And that was the story of midnight on the 31st of December 1984. The network was real and the future had arrived.
37 years on from that historic first mobile phone call in the UK, Racal Vodafone is now simply just Vodafone, a company I'm sure you've heard of. But it's now a £51 billion multinational. They're no longer based in the old brewery on the Broadway, but are now located in a vast, purpose-built campus on the northern edge of Newbury. They remain Newbury's biggest employer. And of course, you personally have a cell phone in your pocket now, don't you? Our third site is one of Newbury's best known landmarks, Donnington Castle. Technically, it's outside of Newbury town limits, in the parish of Donnington. The castle is often wrongly described as Newbury Castle. Well, that's a different castle and a story for another video. And also, that castle's not inside Newbury town limits either. Located on a hill in the parish of Donnington to the north of Newbury, the castle was built in 1386 by Sir Richard Aberbury the Elder. Today, all that is left is the gatehouse and ruins of the outer walls. For 2.5 centuries after it was constructed, not much of note really happened to this castle. It passed through several owners and a couple of families, and at one point being owned by the Crown under Queen Elizabeth I. By which time the castle had fallen into somewhat of a disrepair. But it was the outbreak of the English Civil War in 1643 that turned the castle into a strategically important location. At the outbreak of the war, it was owned by a parliamentarian. After the First Battle of Newbury, it was captured by the Royalists and then heavily garrisoned. As depicted in this sketch, field defences, earthworks and cannon were constructed and deployed on the land surrounding the outer castle wall. As my drone flies from east to west, you can see the layout of the outer castle walls. Also, in the foreground, you can see the outlines of the Civil War earthworks. This is the south side, the side that faces Newbury town. Donington Castle is free to visit and is open during daylight hours all year round. It's about a 30-minute walk from Newbury Town Centre and is very popular with dog walkers and families. The end came for Donington Castle as a result of the Second Battle of Newbury in 1644. Charles I's Royalist army held 3 strong points north of Newbury: Shaw House, the village of Speen and Donington Castle. After the battle between Parliamentarians and Royalists, Donington Castle was besieged, with the garrison holding out for 18 months from October 1644. With permission from the King, the garrison commander John Boys ceded the castle to the Parliamentarians in exchange for a safe passage for him and his men. And to prevent its further use in conflict, in 1646, Parliament ordered the castle to be demolished, leaving only the gatehouse standing. Moving on from a medieval castle built in 1386 on the north side of Newbury to a 20th century castle, well, sort of, built on the south side in 1983. Our fourth historical site is the former Gamma site on Greenham Common, Newbury's country park on the south edge of town. Greenham Common was until 1991 the site of a Cold War American air base. The Gamma site was a heavily protected and defended nuclear weapons storage facility, built in 1983 and costing over $1 billion. Gamma stands for Ground Launched Cruise Missile Alert and Maintenance Area, and the mounds you can see used to house a total of 24 cruise missile launchers. To give you some idea of the enormity of the destructive firepower once housed in this small corner of Newbury from 1983 to 1991, each of the 24 BGM-109 Griffin transporter launchers carried 4 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Each missile carried a single Whiskey 80 thermonuclear warhead. Here's one we made earlier. Yes, I know you've been totally lied to by Hollywood. The Whiskey 80 warhead is about the size of an office fire extinguisher but weighs over 100 kilograms. It has a 400 kiloton yield. That is 20 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb. To illustrate the damage that would do, here is an example as if we detonated a single Whiskey 80 warhead in Newbury Market Square. Everything in the grey circle would be reduced to radioactive rubble, with broken windows and flash blindness as far north as Oxford and as far south as Winchester. Just remember, the Gamma site held 96 Whiskey 80 warheads, enough to remove 96 Soviet cities from the face of the earth in the Cold War. Today, thankfully with all the nuclear weapons gone for over 30 years, the Gamma site is now simply an ancient monument. Shameless plug now, I've created a 45-minute documentary on Greenham Common history. Check out the card at the top right hand corner of the screen if you want to learn more about Newbury's Cold War country park. And for my millennial viewers, aren't you glad that you don't live under the threat of complete nuclear annihilation like us Gen Xers had as teenagers and young people during the Cold War? Yeah, about that. To visit our fifth historical site, you'll need to walk about 300 metres west on the present-day Enbourne Road from Newbury Town Centre, until you arrive in the area at the present-day Newbury Hill School. On the pavement, by the railings, is a very small monument to a uniquely barbaric time in British history. Very few passers-by stop to read the inscription on this stone, which states, in commemoration of the Newbury martyrs, Julian Palmer, John Gwynn and Thomas Askew, burnt near this place in July 1556. Also, Christopher Shoemaker, a Lollard, burnt near here in 1518. The Reformation period in Britain and Europe in the mid-1500s was the split of the Catholic and Protestant beliefs in Christianity. In the medieval period, church-state monarchy was so intertwined, to criticise or undermine the church was seen not only as morally abhorrent, but a challenge to the ruling establishment. As religious unorthodoxy began to spread in Europe, it was put down with particularly savage and inhuman punishment to deter others. The two worst things you could be accused of in 1500s Britain was being a witch or a heretic. In July 1556, 3 Protestants were put on ecclesiastical trial in Newbury. Julian Palmer, John Gwynn and Thomas Askew were all accused of heresy for denying the Pope's supremacy and criticising Catholic Mass as idolatry. The trial lasted 2 days, with all three men standing by their Protestant faith. One of the trial panel even visited the accused during the night to offer an acquittal in the morning if they publicly recanted their views and asked for forgiveness. This was refused. On the second day of the trial, they were found guilty of heresy and sentenced to be burnt at the stake. At 5 p.m. that day, they were conveyed by the sheriff and secular authorities to a place known as Sandpits, where the present-day Newbury School is built, and publicly burnt to death. Because all three preferred to endure a horrific death rather than recant their faith, today they are celebrated as Protestant martyrs. The fourth name on the monument is Christopher Shoemaker, a Lollard, burnt at the stake in the same location some 4 decades earlier for heresy. Lollards were an early Protestant sect who followed the writings of John Wycliffe. Shoemaker's crime that got him burnt at the stake was preaching the Bible in English, not the required ecclesiastical Latin as required by the Catholic Church in 1518. The Reformation was one of the shaping epochs in British history, but its legacy is still felt some 4 centuries later in Britain, where Catholic versus Protestant sectarianism, violence and even murder is still a feature in some British communities in 2022. If you've driven from the town centre northwest out of Newbury, you'll no doubt have seen, but probably won't have acknowledged, our 6th historical site, the Speen Obelisk on Old Bath Road. Like Queen Victoria's Memorial, the obelisk is not in its original location. The Speen Obelisk is in fact a coaching beacon and Newbury's first public streetlight. What today is the top of Newbury's shopping district, the Broadway, back in the 1700s was a separate parish of Speen Hamland, and by a fortune of geography found itself a stage on the coaching route between London and Bristol. A route 300 years later that is now the A4 trunk road. Coaches would stage from Bath to Speen Hamland and then change or rest horses, and passengers would be able to stay in one of the coaching inns overnight. In most cases, coaches travelled only by daylight, and at night the coaching inns were lit by candle and oil lamp. Those coaching inns are still standing today on what is now the London Road. As gas lighting started to prevail from candlelight and oil lamps from 1825 onwards, the commissioners of Newbury and Speen Hamland decided that the Speen Hamland Crossroads Junction was a hazard night to horses and carriages that would benefit from being illuminated during the hours of darkness. In 1828, the Speen Hamland obelisk was constructed of donated Bath stone and sited opposite the George and Pelican Inn, topped by a large double-burning gas lamp funded by public subscription. And in this lithograph from 1835, you can see the obelisk on the right-hand side opposite the George and Pelican Inn. The obelisk was Newbury's first public streetlight in 1828, but by the 1880s, gas street lighting was the norm throughout the town. In 1888, it was decided to replace the obelisk with a clock tower and 4 gas lamps to commemorate Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee of that year. Now surplus to requirement, the redundant obelisk, being heavy and hard to move, was placed, or rather should I say dumped, on the junction of Bath Road, now Old Bath Road, and Speen Lane, 500 metres away, where it was left to rot for over a century, its gas lamp having been scavenged years earlier. Even its replacement Jubilee clock did not last more than 35 years. With horse-drawn coaches now replaced by motor vehicles in the early part of the 20th century, in 1922, the Queen Victoria Jubilee clock was replaced by a traffic island and purpose-built clock tower that still stands in Newbury today. Finally recognised as a vital monument to Newbury's heritage, in the late 1990s, the Speen Obelisk and its surrounds were refurbished in its new location, and it was given a new lease of life as a beacon, lit this time by electricity, not gas, lighting up on the eve of the new millennium in the year 2000. And this is the Speen Obelisk in 2022. Running straight through Newbury is the Kennet and Avon Canal, a man-made waterway constructed in the late 1790s. It was a coincidence of this canal and the town, also the events of the early 1940s, that poised Newbury to become a frontline battle town in World War II. After the Dunkirk evacuation in 1940, Hitler's attempted invasion of Britain was expected in early 1941. So in summer 1940, massive defensive preparations began in southern England. It was expected that Hitler's seaboard invasion in 1941 would see German forces landing on the southeastern English coastline, who would then attempt to move in and capture London. The first line of defence was obvious, and that was the English Channel and southeast coast. However, if that line was defeated by the Germans, a fallback defensive line was to be constructed, basically Britain's version of the Maginot Line. This defensive line was given the typical British utility name, Stop Line. There were 4 lines in total, each known by a colour code. Because canals are a natural tank obstacle, GHQ, General Headquarters, Stop Line Blue was based along the River Avon and the Kennet and Avon Canal from Bristol to London, straight through the heart of Newbury. As any soldier will tell you, a military obstacle must be covered by fire. So, in summer 1940, hundreds of concrete fortifications were constructed along the stop line. This one is near Newbury Northcroft Sports Centre. These hardened fortifications became known as pillboxes due to their resemblance to medicine containers in the early 1940s. They followed a standard plan drawn up by the War Department's the Directorate of Fortifications and Works, and depending on role depended on the design. The Type 22 and Type 24 being the most common. The ground on the southern side of the canal, i.e. the enemy side of the obstacle, will be heavily mined with anti-tank mines and anti-personnel mines and strewn with barbed wire. This was planned, but no mines were ever actually laid. Each pillbox was a strong point in an overall platoon or company defensive position and had a garrison of between 6 and 9 regular army or Home Guard soldiers. Fortunately, the stop line was never actually needed in war, and Newbury was spared destruction in battle. As in a strategic error that ultimately cost Hitler the war, he chose to invade eastwards into the Soviet Union instead of across the Channel into the UK in 1941. So, by 1942, the thousands of pillboxes constructed in the summer of 1940 became redundant. Most are still with us today, 80 years later. If you walk along the canal through Newbury today, you will still find remnants of World War II Stop Line Blue 80 years on. You'll generally find pillboxes located at pre-1940s era bridges. Some of them today are very well camouflaged, and you'd probably not know they were there unless you'd seen this video. Although Adolf Hitler's planned invasion of the UK in 1940 never materialised, Newbury was not to be spared from the death and destruction of World War II. Our 8th historical site brings us to St John's Road, Newtown Road roundabout, which 80 years ago was the epicentre of one of Newbury's darkest days. On the green space you're now looking at once stood a row of houses called Southampton Terrace. At last light, at 4:35 p.m. on Wednesday the 10th of February 1943, Newbury was attacked by a single Luftwaffe Dornier 217 bomber at low level. The aircraft was one of a pair that had taken off from occupied Holland, which had then followed the line of the Great Western Railway from London. One aircraft attacked Reading, whilst the other veered off over Greenham and attacked Newbury town centre. The raid came as a complete surprise to the town, and there was no time for an air raid warning siren. Newbury was attacked by 4 times 400 kilogram bombs and 4 times 50 kilogram bombs. Concurrently, the forward and dorsal gunners strafed the streets of Newbury with heavy machine gun fire. Fortuitously, Wednesday was early closing day by tradition in Britain, and all the shops in Newbury had shut up for business at lunchtime. And, being a cold February late afternoon, there were few people on the streets. So, fortunately, there were no casualties from machine gun fire. However, for the bombs, it was a completely different story. It is believed that the Luftwaffe's mission was to destroy economic targets in the home counties, and the bombers' main target was Newbury Station. using a prominent signal box on high ground as an aiming point. The bomber approached from the southwest and released all its bombs as it crossed Newtown Road. These are the impact points shown against a 1940 map of the town. 2 of the 50-kilogram bombs failed to explode, the first and the last, but all the 400-kilogram bombs did detonate. It's actually easy to visualise from a present-day Google Earth image of Newbury. The white arrow indicates the green space and memorial where we presently stood. The first bomb that left the aircraft failed to explode, landing in the back garden just west of the Newtown Road. The second bomb destroyed Southampton Terrace. The third destroyed St John's Church, fortunately empty of worshippers at the time. The fourth bomb destroyed St Bartholomew's almshouses, which were ancient social housing for elderly people. And sadly, the fifth bomb badly damaged the senior council school. Now, fortunately, by 4 p.m, most children had finished school for the day, but a few teachers and a few kids remained behind in an after-school club. The final bombs, or 50-kilogram bombs, hit open land to the north of the railway signal box, causing minimal damage. Immediately after the aircraft had left, emergency services quickly got into action. Tragically, 15 people were killed in the bombing, ranging in age from 12 years old to 80 years old. A further 41 were wounded, 25 of those very seriously. Of the 15 killed, 3 were kids from the senior council school and 2 of their teachers. All the victims of the Newbury bombing are buried in a communal grave in Shaw Cemetery about 2 miles away from the town centre, marked with a commemorative plaque. At 4 p.m. on the 10th of February 2013, exactly 70 years after the event, the present-day memorial was unveiled. The stone plinth is located in the green space where Southampton Terrace once stood, and on the site of the first bomb explosion. Southampton Terrace was never rebuilt. St John's Church, however, was rebuilt almost immediately after the end of the Second World War, and it was opened by Princess Margaret in 1955. If you've ever driven south out of Newbury towards Andover, no doubt you'll have noticed this imposing obelisk on the crossroads of Wash Common, South Newbury, which is our 9th historical location today. Few people know exactly what it signifies or commemorates. The memorial is known as the Falkland Memorial, which always causes some confusion with the 1982 Falklands War. The memorial is named after Lucius Carey, 2nd Viscount Falkland, a politician and cavalryman in the Royalist Army who died at that spot on the 20th of September 1643 in the First Battle of Newbury. Constructed in 1878, the memorial, although named after one man, Viscount Falkland, is there to mark and commemorate the fallen of the First Battle of Newbury in 1643 during the English Civil War. This hand-coloured photograph from 1900 shows the obelisk in place, and the building in the background is the Gun Public House, which still stands to this day, so called because it is built on the site of the Royalist gun line. The memorial is controversial, as it only commemorates the fallen on the royalist side of the battle, not the parliamentarians. And the reason given for this deliberate snub was that the memorial sponsors did not wish to offend Queen Victoria. The controversial inscription reads, "In the memory of those who, on the 20th of September 1643, fell fighting in the army of Charles I on the field of Newbury, especially of Lucius Carey, Viscount Falkland, who died here in the 32nd year of his age. This monument is set up by those whom the majesty of the crown and the liberty of their country are dear." Our 10th and final historical location in this video follows on from our visit to the Falkland Memorial and is also associated with the First Battle of Newbury in the English Civil War. 5 minutes walk from the Gun Public House and Falkland Memorial is the Wash Common Recreation Ground, where you'll find kids playing football and teenagers drinking cheap cider. The recreation ground reportedly holds a very dark secret. The First Battle of Newbury took place here on the 20th of September 1643 between some 30,000 combatants on both the Royalist and Parliamentarian side, of which 3,000 soldiers were killed in action. It is recorded in the war diaries that the dead were buried in 3 communal graves or pits, one for Royalists, one for Parliamentarians and one for horses. There are 2 mounds on Wash Common Recreation Ground that are marked as Civil War mass graves. It's much clearer from the drone flight. Both mounds are on the south side of the recreation ground by the gate to Battery End Close. Side note, all the streets in this part of Newbury have Civil War related names. On the top of each mound is a memorial stone placed in the early 1800s. I could leave the story there, but I wouldn't be much of a historian if I did. Unfortunately, it's simply not true. Those who placed the commemoration stones on the mounds some 2 centuries ago had probably listened to local legends from the early 1700s. The mounds are in fact late Neolithic burial barrows from around 1400 BC and almost certainly do not contain the remains of Civil War soldiers. To be fair, it's an easy mistake to make, and you can see why it entered local folklore. Looking at the battle map, the mounds are coincidentally right in the centre of the battle. The communal graves do exist and they're mentioned in the war diaries, but have never been located, and they are likely to be sited in the area of Roundhill, some 400 metres west of the recreation ground and the mislabelled Neolithic burial mounds. Well, that's our 10 sites done and dusted. I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please click the like and subscribe buttons, because that lets me know what content people like and what they don't. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye now.